Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us to our webinar, Embrace the Collective. I'm very excited to be presenting with the illustrious Stephen Pies of Publicis Media. And we're very excited about sharing our findings. It's called, this study was executed last year, and we're calling the research findings Embrace the Collective, the Hispanic Digital Purchase Journey, because we learned a lot about the Hispanic market and its collective behavior online. This study was executed with Publicis Media, Adsmovil, and ThinkNow research. And we're going to jump in and share some very interesting findings. So I'm going to start with Stephen Pye's introduction. He is EVP of Multicultural Investment and Innovation at Publicis. Stephen has been in this industry for a while, as I have, and is a very well-respected media and marketing executive. And my name is
I'd
Maria.
like to admit, so thank you for having me, Maria.
both of us, for sure.
We're like fine wines.
Yes, we're trying to age gracefully. My name is Maria Twina. I'm CMO of Adsmovil, and as you can see by the little screen here, I'm also the creator of Marivida Master Navigator, which is on our platform Nuestra TV. All right, so a little bit about our sponsors today. Adsmovil is a Hispanic digital media company committed to driving brand resonance across the multi-generational Hispanic market. And we always focus on the multiple generations. Thinking that the Hispanic market is a monolith is a misperception. The reality is it's very distinct from countries of origin to levels of acculturation to linguistic proficiency and device preferences across the board. There are a lot of differences. So we make sure that we drive brand resonance across the Hispanic market. We've pioneered Hispanic mobile advertising. We've been doing this for 10 plus years, have direct relationships with over 3,000 Hispanic publishers, which gives us an opportunity to create unique custom opportunities for our brands. We reach 69% of the total Hispanic digital population, and we're minority owned and certified, which gives us great pride. We offer omni-channel solutions across a plethora of screens. We have authentic targeting across many variables. We offer custom high-impact solutions because of our unique relationships with our publishers. And we recently launched Nuestra.tv, which is our owned and operated bilingual, bicultural AVOD. So that's a little bit about Adsmovil. And now Stephen can tell us a little bit about Publicis Media.
Yeah, thank you, Maria. Again, thank you so much for having me here. I'm excited on the partnership and the study that we were able to conduct. There's going to be some rich insights, so excited about that. Publicis Media has been founded over 3 decades ago, and we're the leaders in building. We span across planning and activation, research and measurement. As you can see through our partnership with Adsmovil, we were able to bring through this thought leadership. And we sit at the center of Publicis Group across communications, health, our media brands such as Zenith, Spark, Starcom, and then our commerce and content practice. So really providing those insights and audience understanding to drive growth with diverse audiences. And at the bottom, you'll see some of our key clients across that are activating with multicultural specific and leading the industry.
Thank you, Stephen.
Yeah. So before we jump into it, we wanted to level set in terms of what the objective was here, right? When Adsmovil and us got together along with ThinkNow, we really wanted to set off on the partnership to drive and create a new source of information that is a white space in the marketplace. When we set off on this partnership, we knew that at the core, Hispanics were digital first. And when we talked about digital, we knew that they were mobile heavy. We also wanted to ensure that insights would help give brands an understanding of how that purchase journey and how they make decisions across the households in comparison to non-Hispanic consumers. Something else that was critical to understand was the impact of acculturation and how decisions are made based on your acculturation level, whether it was low, medium, or high, and also looking at age cohorts. How do millennials behave in comparison to Generation X and boomers? So with that being said, I'm going to hand it over to Maria, who's going to walk you through the methodology and the first portion of the study.
Thanks, Stephen. And before I proceed, I wanted to ask everyone if you have any questions to please put it in the Q&A and we'll address any questions at the end of the presentation. All right, so the methodology, as I mentioned earlier, this research was executed last year during the summer. We had 600 respondents, and as Stephen mentioned, we wanted to see the differences and the distinctions between Hispanic heads of households and non-Hispanic heads of households. And as we talked earlier, we're committed to understanding the multi-generational Hispanic market, not just the Spanish dom, not just the bilingual, not just the English dom. So what we did was we recruited ThinkNow as our research partner. They have an online national panel where they can break up the audience model by age cohort and by level of acculturation. So what we wanted to do was make sure we were representative of the total populace. We looked at the millennial, the Gen X, and the boomers. And we also looked at the low, the medium, and the high acculturation levels, which are self-defined and driven a lot by linguistic preferences. So I'm going to stop here a second to just have you look at this photo, right? Now we're going to talk about exploration and discovery and activating the collective. This visual to me says everything, because one of the key findings here has been that even though in our space we talk about one-to-one marketing, when it comes to the Hispanic market, there is a collective on the other side of the ether, whether we're aware of it or not. And they are very much informing each other, and that collective behavior that happens offline happens online as well. And this study validates all of those hypotheses. So let's look at the first one. When it comes to researching something for a family member or friend, we asked how often, right? Once a month or more. So interestingly enough, Hispanics, here we're looking at the chart on the left, we have Hispanics and non-Hispanics, Hispanics in purple. Hispanics are more likely than non-Hispanics to help others as they explore product offerings. And then if you look at the detail of the age cohorts, millennials, whether they're Hispanic or non-Hispanic, or the groups across all age cohorts here in this particular study that are helping others find product information. Hispanics in both Gen X and Boomer are more likely than non-Hispanics to assist with search, which is very interesting. The Gen X is pretty close in numbers, but if you look at the Boomer delta, it's 20, there's a 20-point difference here. So Hispanic Boomers are much more likely than non-Hispanic Boomers to assist in search. So the key finding here is that Hispanic online behavior mirrors their offline behavior in terms of that collective ethos and living that the value set of family and community over self. For what are the implications for brands? Brands need to market to the collective, right? We talked earlier about one-to-one marketing. When it comes to the Hispanic market, it's never really been about one-to-one marketing. And now we have the findings to validate that. Multiple individuals inform everyday brand decisions and help in the search process. And we're going to go deeper into that digital journey as we proceed with this presentation. Who is asking you to research for them? We thought this was a really important question. Who are you helping, right? So again, if you look on the left at the chart, we have millennial in purple, Gen X in green, and Boomer in orange. So who are they helping? Millennials are more likely to be helping adults in their immediate family, friends, children under 13, teenagers in immediate family, and their neighbors. And the boomers are the ones most likely to be helping extended family members. And Gen X is helping everyone and more likely to be helping children under 13 when compared to other groups. So this was really interesting in terms of who they're helping. They're helping a lot of different people. And then if you look at the right, we also had the data across acculturation levels, as we talked about earlier. So we have age cohort on the left, and a little insight here on acculturation levels. The low acculturated are the most likely to be helping someone living outside of the US, which I think is fascinating, and it makes a lot of sense. They're much closer to their country of origin, so it makes sense that they're helping their family members outside of the US. The medium acculturated are the most likely to be helping someone in their own household, which also makes a lot of sense. And the high acculturated are more likely to be helping someone living outside their household, but in the US. I do that for my elderly mom, and I know a lot of us do as well. So just interesting that even though they may leave the household and even leave the area where they grew up as they mature, they're still helping one way or another. So key findings, Hispanics are helping family members and friends in their households, outside of their households, and even outside of the US to search for products and services. So what does that mean for a brand? I think brand needs to have easily shareable marketing assets, right? Available in both languages, in Spanish and English, to better serve the needs of the community. And for global brands, we know that there is an international element to all of this. This finding has implications relative to early word of mouth or seeding the marketplace when it comes to product launches or distribution, because the community is already extended to their countries of origin. We asked, why are they asking you to research for them? And to be honest, I think a lot of us were assuming when we executed this study that we were asking them to research for them because of language issues or linguistic barriers. And look at the findings here on the left. And here we're comparing Hispanics with non-Hispanics. Both agree, both had the same percentage, 53% reported that it just takes them longer to find the information. But then if you start looking a little deeper at the other categories, non-Hispanics tended to be slightly more tech intimidated, or reported being a little more tech intimidated than Hispanics. Hispanics reported not comfortable searching, 34%. The English barrier was number 4 here at 26%, and they don't have a computer available. Non-Hispanics were slightly more likely to report that. So the key finding here is that it wasn't only about language. That's really a secondary concern when it comes to needing assistance with searches. It's really about these other findings. And then for a brand, to facilitate the search process for Hispanics, make sure that your results have clear, concise, dual language copy that's easy to discern, but also have a UI that's intuitive, right? Because clearly, not understanding and being intimidated by tech is one of the reasons preventing successful searches.
I think, Maria, if I can jump in on that, sorry, if just as a point of, I think what was interesting for me on that slide specifically was the barriers, right? Where they're less tech sensitive than we see it non-Hispanics. So they're less tech intimidated versus non-Hispanics. And the language barrier, right? I think what's happened is that regardless of language or acculturation, Hispanics have been trained to look for information in English, and then all the information is in Spanish. So that's where that barrier is only a quarter of Hispanics in this respondent base versus, you know, those tech type of information.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, it's very interesting. The English barrier is interesting, and the tech intimidation, not comfortable searching. There's a lot of insights here for brands that want to facilitate the process for the Hispanic journey, because I think as we facilitate the process overall, it creates obviously a positive brand experience and advocacy down the road, right?
Yeah.
No, great. So while most searches are in English, more than half are in Spanish or a combination of languages. I get this question asked a lot. So we ask, what language do you use when searching for others? Again, millennial in purple, Gen X in blue, boomer in orange. Boomers, 62% were the ones who reported that English is what they use when searching. Very interesting. The millennials, 22% say it's Spanish or a combination of both languages. Gen X, almost half, 47% report English, and then the balance, 28% and 25% Spanish or a combination of both languages. What's really clear here is just that there is collective behavior online. There is collective linguistic behavior online, if you will, right? So Gen X Hispanics are the most likely to be searching in Spanish or a combination of both. Boomer Hispanics are the most likely to search only in English. We've got a couple of theories of why that is. One is that boomers tend to be older, so they were really much more they were much more likely to assimilate, if you will, or move toward assimilation. And that may be one of the reasons. But I think it's very interesting that the boomer Hispanics are the most likely to search only in English. And when it comes to brand implications, we tend to forget search sometimes. When it comes to marketing to the Hispanic market, we think we will develop a creative ad across acculturation levels, serve it up to the community, drive them online. But before all of that happens, search many times happens. So search terms in English, Spanish, and or a combination of both should be part of a brand's SEO strategy when targeting Hispanics.
Yeah, and I think it's so compelling too what you're saying about the English, who's preferring to do English, because a lot of times I think brands, or there's a perception that the younger generations aren't necessarily consuming in language. So it was nice to see, as that was one of the core reasons why we did the study, and the reasons why we did the breakout of it, right? To see how acculturation and ages affect language consumption and the journey. So
yeah, agreed. And I was having this conversation with Mario from ThinkNow earlier this week about the use of Spanish and millennials and Gen Z, right? I mean, so Gen Z is the most multicultural, multi-ethnic cohort we've ever had. And we think they are, and heavily obviously engaged with social, we think they are driving a lot of this shift that's happening in the country with you don't have to assimilate. You can have a steady state of biculturalism. It's actually okay. And this conversation we were having was interesting because I really believe that's because multicultural is the majority in that generation. Yeah. So they don't need, that cohort doesn't need or doesn't feel like they need to assimilate, right? So lots, right? Lots to study here. All right, I'll turn this over to Stephen, who's going to talk about the journey.
Yeah, thanks, Maria. So as she mentioned, I'm going to take you through the platforms that they're using and the nuances in when they're sharing recommendations, how they're sharing recommendations, and what active categories. I think definitely when I was going through the data, it surprised me. So Maria, I look forward to a nice dialogue there as well. So jumping right into it. What we see here is that specifically for Hispanics, right, the device used throughout the day across the board, mobile has over penetration in comparison to all the other platforms. But we've always known this for Hispanics, as they've been mobile first since the onset of really the mobile phone, right? They were considered the leapfrog effect in terms of bypassing desktop and laptops and going straight to their mobile phone. And as we continue to see that penetration be at parity to non-Hispanics, we still see that there's an over-index when we look at what the time that they're spending on their mobile phone. We know that both younger consumers, both Millennial and Gen X, and low acculturated Hispanics are using mobile phones. So all this information is on overall Hispanics, but also we dove into specifically acculturation levels. So if there's any specific questions, we could bring that up as a follow-up. As I mentioned, right, mobile phone is being utilized as the main point of entry from a digital perspective for all, both non-Hispanics and Hispanics, but it continues to over-index from a Hispanic perspective. And what we think here from a brand perspective, we need to ensure that the experience is set up to deliver on this mobile phone platform. So ensuring that it's optimized from a site perspective and an experience perspective. And then when we go into,
No, I was just going to reinforce what you said earlier about, we know that mobile is the entry point for many Hispanic households, right? So that's another reason why this over-index is so obvious. Yeah.
If we want to go to the next slide.
Okay.
So here, I found this to be very interesting, specifically when we're looking at where Hispanics over-index versus non-Hispanics. Search tends to be the highest usage when Hispanics are going to look for information online. But where you see that over-index and the significant over-index, close to 20% over-index versus non-Hispanics, is on retail sites, right? I think that, at least my hypothesis, when you think of search engines, a lot of terms are traditionally in English and Spanish the same. So whether a brand terms are they're not necessarily language specific, they're more so language agnostic. And we know that from a search perspective, the majority of Hispanics, regardless of their language preference or acculturation levels, do not have their settings for Spanish. So that can't just be the signal designator to really look at how Hispanics are searching online. But what we did see here, and this is what I mentioned from the onset, was that they are truly leaning on to retail sites to really get that information. And then we also see an over-index in terms of mobile phone apps and social media platforms, but almost at half of the percentage that they're actually going to retail sites. So from a key finding perspective, we know that Hispanics are using search engines at a lesser percentage than non-Hispanics, but it's still a critical part of the purchase journey. But we know that that retail experience and user experience when they get to that brand page is also going to be critical. And as I mentioned, similar to, yeah, go ahead.
No, Stephen, go on. I was just going to mention something about retail I thought I had.
Go, please.
Oh, okay. So, and this was a discussion I was having with one of my colleagues a while ago. And, the question, yes, the search terminology would make the lower acculturated probably more comfortable with retailer sites. But also, I think it's because the lower acculturated are more, since they're more collective, they tend to be more tactile, and they like retail. They like the affinity they have to the brands that have retail physical footprints, right? So they've been in there, they're a little more comfortable with them. It's been demystified a little, that particular retail experience, right? Amazon is the one that's different here, but I see why the Walmart and Target, the retailer sites on the lower acculturated, we'd see a higher incidence of using retailer sites.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, right? Because even it's higher than total Hispanics. So that means that there's a significant over-index when you look at them in comparison to not only Hispanics, but non-Hispanics on how they're going to retailer sites. So they're following the journey, right? Now they're going to the retailer sites. Now it's how do the retailers, deliver on that consumer experience. So it's definitely something that they're going to. So something that brands need to take into consideration.
Great.
And then here, I really love this because it resonated with me. It's definitely something here where we see that the majority of how they're sharing the information or where they're sharing the information from is very similar to the non-Hispanic, but where we see a significant over-index is in actually texting a product link or screenshots. So using that functionality, we know that they're over-indexers and utilizing WhatsApp. So from my perspective, it really resonated and validated my behaviors personally. So it's definitely from an overall perspective in this e-commerce and retail experiences, especially when we'll go into the next slide, but don't want to give it away yet. That opportunity for brands is how can we ensure that there's an option to send that whatever they're searching or whatever site they're on through a text message or a WhatsApp opportunity to really get that information out to, their collective, as you mentioned very well, that it is a collective when we think about Hispanics overall. I don't know if there's anything
super
else
interesting.
here, that you
want. I just wanted, just what you were saying, I think an opportunity for sharing and an opportunity maybe even for pre-populating texts or emails in language to help that process even better, right? So it's like I'm sharing and it's in language to the recipient, right? That would be interesting as well, just having those options.
Cool. And then here, this is what I was referring to when I was going into this section. I was very surprised in terms of, well, not so surprised. I think it was what my mindset was. It's usually bigger or larger purchases that affect the family. But the more I dug into the information, some of the insights that I found, right, where we see that there's a higher percentage of assistance or, coordination or collaboration in terms of the purchase journey was retail at first, but that's very much at par with non-Hispanics. I think everybody wants to get a recommendation when they're like, hey, what does this look like? Or, do you like this shirt or do you like, well, I do it. So I'm assuming everybody does. So I was gonna say a blouse, but I don't I don't share blouses. But it's followed by it's retail first, right? Followed by technology, then household appliances and groceries and personal care, right? And I think that when I started to dig into this and think about, what are these reasons? And similarly, right, when we see about groceries not only being one of the highest percentages of where there's collaboration or assistance, it's also one of the ones with the greatest amount of index in comparison to non-Hispanics. So what I hypothesize there is due to the household sizes, right? They're larger households, they're more multi-generational. So they do have that collaboration and that input when making decisions on groceries. So that's something that I think is keen on for CPG brands. I think from a telco perspective, while that's one of the lower areas for both non-Hispanics and Hispanics that are getting assistance when searching, it's still the largest over index when you're thinking about Hispanics versus non-Hispanics. So that's somewhere where if you're a telco, you should definitely lean in and consider how you're communicating, as it tends to be more of either a collaborative decision or a household decision. That was followed by prescription. And I think that prescription and over-the-counter medications, I think that's very heritage, or at least from a personal perspective, that has always been, you go to your collective or, your tribe to find recommendations, versus just depending on whether it's a doctor, looking at what those medications and prescription medication recommendations. And similar to groceries, QSR was the fourth with the highest index in comparison to QSR fast foods, right? Fast food restaurants were the highest in terms of the fourth highest from an index perspective in comparison to non-Hispanics. And I do attribute that to more so being like, we always see when we look at all the QSR data that check sizes tend to be higher when we look at Hispanics. And that tends to be because they're bringing more people in for the purchase. So as I was saying on the onset, right, when we were looking at when I was looking through the information, some of these categories pop. So it is more of a collective experience and an assistance when making purchases, regardless of the size of that. So that has to be taken consideration across the board when you're really thinking about how the Hispanic purchase journey is.
Yeah, Stephen, and the only thing I would add to that is that, yes, the surprise for us when we did this research was the fact that it's everyday shopping categories. And yeah, the other thing that I think is really interesting is, for example, prescription medications. When it comes to categories where the lexicon that's used in those categories, like healthcare, is not something that's used every day and something that you need to learn and you don't know, you have to rely on your tribe to give you information. And I was doing some research last week, and there was I think it's only 9% of physicians in this country are Spanish dominant, right? And that is such a small percent. So if you are in need of healthcare and you need a prescription medication, and you're not having an in-culture experience where you understand everything that's being shared with you, you have to rely on the collective, as you do for event moments like household appliances. You're buying a big household appliance, big investments you need to as well. So the surprise here is every day, from big to areas where you're not familiar with the lexicon or the language around a category.
I do think that you bring up a very good point with the prescription, right? In terms of not only from a PCP or overall doctor, that's a low percentage. We also see that that's a tremendous white space when it comes to advertising to Hispanics. There's definitely an underutilization of Hispanic media when you think of pharmaceuticals advertising in culture and in language. So that's definitely an area of opportunity for those types of brands and that category for sure.
Yeah, and the only thing I'm going to add to that is, and I even think it goes beyond advertising to demystifying a lot of things from an educational perspective, and having Spanish language video or resources available so that the influencers in the family can easily share with their family members. So the family members get the information in Spanish from a professional organization, and those that are influencing, the burden is removed from them, right? So it's a win-win for everybody.
All right. So going into that next slide, should we tackle the Q&A now, or do you prefer that? Well, there's not a lot, so
Oh,
um, I think we have a couple. So the content will be shared after, right? Or do you rather wait until I think we tackle the Q&A, no?
okay, we can tackle the Q&A. Let me go back. You want to do that before we share
Sure.
findings?
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely, so that people can read. And a reminder, input your questions into the Q&A, not necessarily the chat, because we're monitoring the Q&A overall. So please go ahead and do that. Maria, first question, I'll hand it to you.
Okay. Can you tell me what it is, Stephen? Because I think
Oh
if
yeah,
I
will the
open it,
content be
everyone will
shared
see it.
after the webinar?
Oh, yes, absolutely. We will share this right after the webinar.
Yes. Okay. And then the next one from Julie. I did say that traditionally what we see is that the majority of Hispanics, regardless of acculturation or language preference, do not have either their mobile phone settings or their browser settings to Spanish. So if a brand is only leveraging Spanish language browser settings to target Hispanics, that's going to be a huge miss. And what I was what I was speaking about in terms of keywords, right? When you're using a brand, for example, if you're going to be looking for Publicis, right? That's a brand term. And then if you don't have the brand term, if you don't have your browser setting set to Spanish, then that won't come up within a Hispanic. It won't technically be called, it won't be a Hispanic search because neither the browser setting is in Spanish and there's no keyword within that because the brand is, well, technically, I think Publicis is French. So it might come up as a French word, but if you're talking about any brand, right? Verizon, if you're searching for Verizon, that would be a term that is going to come up as a brand, which is language agnostic. But then if you put Verizon en Español or Teléfono Verizon, that'll help it come up within that Spanish. So that's what I was referring to in terms of there's an underrepresentation of Hispanics searching overall because of that. And I think that's also where I was alluding to, that people are not so dependent on search because they know that the results aren't always going to be relevant because of the way that it's done in Spanish versus English. So
Correct.
Guillermo, Memo, what's up? Hola Maria and Steven. Hola Maria y Steven. Will you break out all this great data by levels of acculturation? So I think
will
definitely,
yes.
yeah. We have it where it's at least there's where it's able and there's no data instability. I think we definitely can share that out, but everything was supported through both language, through acculturation level and age cohorts.
Yes, and thanks for joining, Memo.
Yes. Awesome. We have another question. So should advertisers conduct multicultural US journey studies first before jumping into the targeting multicultural audiences? I'll let you start this one because I have my own opinion. So.
Oh, yeah, that is a great question. I can't see who asked it, but that's a great question. I think you need to know your audience as much as you can before you start doing some test and prove, right? So the good news is there is research like this where we have information across acculturation levels and linguistic proficiencies and age cohorts. But this is, to be honest, there's not that much research broken out to this level of detail. It's for many reasons, which I won't go into, but it's not a very easy thing to do, right? I would start small. I would execute research but I'm a research nut. So let me just start by saying there's a bias inherent in this response, right? I am a research nut. I love research. I love primary research, secondary research. So I would definitely do some research and I would start small and I would test regionally if you want and do A/B testing if it's just a digital media campaign that you're running, but definitely do A/B testing. Make sure you're employing best practices know that it's not just like the market is very different depending on country of origin, age of entry, linguistic proficiency, level of acculturation. The market also has best practices tied to those different cohorts. So you market a little differently to a Spanish language dominant Hispanic than you do to a bilingual, bicultural Hispanic if you want to get the best results. So the answer would be yes, do research, don't over research, do research, and then research what's already existing, and then speak to the experts who know these markets and minimize, a bad investment, because you want to do it right from the beginning, because you're going to have that. Remember, it's a collective on the other side, and that's really true about a lot of the multicultural segments. Yeah. Stephen?
So yeah, I think I agree with what you said. I also think that a lot of times perfection equals paralysis, and it leads brands to just be like, oh, we can't do this because not every single part of the user journey is either culturally or language relevant. And as we saw, that wasn't necessarily the largest barrier when it came to it. So to Hispanics actually in their digital journey. So I agree that where I would lean most heavily on is ensuring that you have the right KPIs in place whenever you're starting to market to Hispanics. So understand what your gap is with the Hispanic, what your gap and what your opportunity is with the Hispanic consumer, and then try to see, what type of measurement you can put in place. But I wouldn't use that as a crutch as to not start advertising to Hispanic audiences, because the whole entire user experience isn't optimized to them. So
yeah.
All right. So that's all the questions we got.
All right. Okay. If anyone else thinks of anything, feel free. All right. So
yeah, we're gonna tag team this one. So as we're wrapping up, I think we made sure we made a lot of insinuations to this, and while Hispanics are not, and even in her last response, Maria was alluding to that Hispanics have a lot, in addition to not only acculturation level, but ethnicity also impacts when we think about Hispanics. But it is still a collective. They still are leaning on each other to get assistance in terms of searching. As I talked about the categories ones, right? A lot of those weren't expected categories that are so heavily over indexing versus Hispanics, or even the percentage that are looking for assistance. So, as we set out, one of the objectives was to definitely understand from a generational and acculturation level how Hispanics behave. And we were able to lean in on a lot of insights here that can help brands and our advertisers really be able to resonate with these Hispanics and engage. And also a lot of learnings from a search perspective in terms of where and how they're doing it and how they're sharing it. So there are distinct online behaviors that Hispanics conduct on the journey versus non-Hispanics. And what are the do's and don'ts, Maria?
Oh, the do's and don'ts. All right. Thanks, Stephen. So do recognize that most consumers are helping others with the purchases. Again, it's what we talk about all the time, the difference in the ethos. The Latino culture is all about collectivism, which means it's all about community and family over self. The American ethos is all about self-reliance and independence. So you have two conflicting ethos, independence and interdependence. And we are an interdependent community. Even the bicultural ones are interdependent, and we're self-reliant too. But just recognize that we're helping others with purchases. We come from a collective DNA. The younger and the less acculturated are the most likely to be helping, but all are helping, and all are helping different members in the family and different friends, both in the household, outside the household, and even outside the US. Do understand that mobile devices are the lifeline for the Hispanic market. I think that's kind of old news, but what's new is really that it's the most used device across day parts for search and purchase across the board, and then also for sharing. So they're using it to search their whole journey through search to securing content, to content consumption, to then sharing information, and then going online after and posting about it on their social networks, whether they're happy with the brand or not. Do facilitate the process of accessing and sharing content. This is what we talked about earlier across language and media. So facilitate the Sherpa's role, the influencer's role, and their ability to co-brand for your brand. So I used to always give this example about if I'm on an automotive site, for example, and I'm helping my father who lives in another state purchase a car, and I'm going to give him a recommendation, I should have a pop-up window or something that easily allows me to text or email or request a direct mail piece to be sent to my father. And I should have an option that says, do it in Spanish or English, facilitate the process. So then he receives an email or a communication that says, Maria has requested that we send you this information. So the co-branding happens right there. He's already trusting your brand because I'm recommending it, right? And he's receiving that information in language, so it's more appealing to him. And I didn't have to call him and give him all of the information about the vehicle. So it's all about it. Everyone wins here. The brand wins, the consumer, the potential consumer wins, and then the influencer who normally would have to do all the work, they win too.
I love that
Don't think
point.
this is.
I really love that point and how you
Yeah.
explain. Love it.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I
Are
just
you
think it's
creative at heart, or
super
are you really a
important.
research person?
I'm both. I'm left, right brain. But I think that's really part of this, right?
Yeah.
Let's make the whole collective, right? And let's include the brand as part of the collective, right? Don't think this is just about providing a Spanish language version of your site. Language is often not the top reason. We saw that when it came to the reason that they're requesting for assistance. Cultural relevance and insights, regardless of acculturation levels, impact everything from sites used for purchase, also for language preferences used for search and purchase, and for social media venues used to share positive and negative experiences. So this is really important. So it's not just about the language, it's about that whole digital journey and the seamless experience, and making sure that you're in culture and in language throughout that whole process. Because even to the posting after the brand experience, post brand experience, even posting is impacted by this. And I'm going to stop here and just share a quick story because we have a couple of minutes. And I just think, I was involved in some research a couple of years ago, which what really demystified a lot for me personally. And I lived it. It was my life experience, but sometimes you have to see it objectively to really say, oh, of course, this makes perfect sense. I'm not alone. First generation Hispanic households that are multi-generational, this whole digital journey sometimes takes a different skew completely, right? So I was doing some research where we were watching the parents asking their children, older children, but asking their children to search for them. So the kids would get on their computer and they would search, and search was happening in English because that's what the kids preferred to speak. Then they would find the information, and if they couldn't find a quick translation for the data, the content, or if they couldn't find a Spanish page or translate it online, they would then translate the information to their family in Spanish, to their parent in Spanish. So two things have happened so far: search in English, content consumption in Spanish. Then when that after content consumption happened, if the parents were happy, the parents would then give the credit card to the kids, and the kids would then execute the e-commerce transaction. And guess what? The e-commerce transaction was executed in English. So you had search in English, content consumption in Spanish, e-commerce transaction in English. And guess who got credit for the e-commerce transaction? The general market got credit for it because it happened on the English language site. So as much as I share that because I think it's a very important story. This isn't linear. And as much as all of our findings are super important, you should be tagging your pages as well to make sure that you understand your consumer's consumer journey, because sometimes it crosses language online and you need to be aware of where does accreditation go here. All right. And then last but not least, don't think that this is only about major purchases as we discussed. This is happening with everyday purchases like groceries, over the counter, prescription meds, fast food, you name it. Those that cost less than $100, it's happening. So brands that are engaged with everyday products or have everyday solutions for the marketplace, just know that the Hispanics are working collectively to move your product.
So while you were chatting, we have a couple more questions that came in. And this one's from Sarah Estaba. What was the data point? And it's interesting because I mean, obviously I'm cheating, you don't see it. So I was thinking about this since she sent it. And what was the data point that most surprised you in this study?
The data point that most surprised me, I think that they're so involved in everyday purchases. I think that really
You stole
surprised
my
me.
answer. I should have answered first.
Was it? Yeah, that's the big one for me. Because I don't know, you always think, yeah, things that have words that aren't everyday terms and terminology that's not like tech terminology, medical terminology, that stuff I always think, of course, we're all helping each other, but that we're helping with QSR and retail. And yeah, that was surprising to me.
And now that you stole my answer, I came up with another one.
Come up with another one. Go on.
There. So what was surprising for me was the generational, how boomers were searching in English more so than millennials and Gen X. And I thought you brought up a very good point in assimilation. And I think you were alluding to this previously when you were talking through the do's and don'ts. It's a lot of times boomers have been trained to behave in a certain way because it was either the right thing, what they had to do, whether it was because assimilation was more the necessity back then, or even being younger when first, like the digital, when the digital started to come to fruition, is that there was even less opportunity to get information in language, so they had to normally default to English language. And to be honest, right, I think what digital has also done is allowed for younger generation to remain that acculturation level to be very fluid across both American culture and Hispanic culture, because it's eliminated all barriers when you really think about geographical barriers and consumption of media. So I think I went back to that, and that was one of the areas where I really found to be interesting in terms of how that generational search is happening. There's two more questions. I don't know if you have anything to add on that.
No, I was going to say that if I had to pick the second one, that would have been it. The boomers and the fact that they were engaging with English language. And then I look at my own life and I say, well, of course, because when we were younger, that was the end game, to assimilate. And we're not seeing that so much anymore.
Yes. Yeah. All right. So this one comes to us from Javier Yunes. Thank you for sharing this information with us. Pregunta en español. I work as Director of Engagement for Hispanic organizations in the USA and Canada in an organization that has a global presence. How do I have a global Hispanic strategy, but at the same time focus on local behaviors? I ask this because studies of Hispanic behavior within the USA show that they are different from Hispanics in LATAM. I think that ethnicity has more of a play to it. And I also think that acculturation levels is where that really, like that much more assimilated Hispanic, right? Because they're not interchangeable. The assimilated Hispanic behaves more like an American in the US, right? Like I can't even say gringo because the other day I got called out that I'm a gringo too. And so I was like,
yeah. But you're right. But it's like a self-reliant American. Let's put it that way. Yeah. That's assimilated. Yeah.
So I would say that that's where the Hispanic strategy needs to be. I think at that point, you're just going to reach them. You can't consider them within your greater Hispanic strategy. It's more so they're probably already being spoken to and more resonating with your general market, quote unquote, right? Your non-Hispanic audiences versus your Hispanics. So what's your thought?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I think the Hispanic behavior at LATAM, totally different than Hispanics in the US, totally different. And it's because in LATAM, if you will, they have their unicultures, their own cultures, the Colombians and Chileans, everyone has, Mexicans, their own culture. But once they step foot in the US and become American or start living here, they are already adapting part of the US culture, which goes back to the ethos, which is so different from all about family and friends to all about taking care of yourself. right? So that's one of the big differences. That's why the behaviors are so different. So we get caught up in language, and it's so much more about culture, in my opinion. It's really about the ethos that you're living every day. So yeah, I would. Thanks for asking. I think for a global Hispanic strategy, I wouldn't focus on just the language. Focus on the ethos at a high level, understanding that the collectivism runs rampant, even with the bicultural to some degree.
Yeah, and I think once you start digging, if you dig enough, you're going to see that there's more similarities than not, when you start to look at it across the board, right? We
Yeah.
have a couple more questions. So this is an anonymous attendee. What is a suggestion on how to start advertising to Hispanic audiences in more complex categories such as pharma, when the need for in-culture and language information is important throughout the patient journey, especially when not much branded information is made available on the Hispanic patient?
Yeah.
I think overall, right, like any highly regulated category, but if you really start to look at that journey, you can start to prioritize where it's most important that you have that in culture and in language, right? To get them into the funnel first, the advertising has to be in culture and in language. And then where are those key points? What type of call to actions are you going to create to make sure that you're taking them on that journey rather than relying on, just throwing something on the wall and trying to make sure it sticks? Like, is it what we've seen previously is that Hispanics tend to want to be referred or speak to someone, right? So is a call to action to have someone that they can actually call and discuss with, and then provide, right, from a Maria, you made a great point in terms of like primary cares. Like, how is that support created within your communication that drives them to a call to action that can take them further into the journey? Would be where my recommendation is, right? I think that there's also, from a regulatory perspective, there's a lot more perception in terms of what needs to be in language or in culture when advertising to Hispanics than the reality really sets forth. I've heard a couple of financial institutions, I've heard a couple of, healthcare companies talk about when they really started to dig in and where it was important to have that in culture and language experience, it wasn't as dramatic as what it sounded, right? And when we were talking, I think it was one of the questions, like sometimes perfection leads to paralysis. Dig into where in the journey that needs to be translated, and in reality, where are those regulations that are put in place that require that you have it in language, in order to not just pause and not take advantage of this huge opportunity when we think about Hispanics.
Yeah, Stephen, agree with you 100%, and agree with the earlier statement as well about advertising to the market is fine, but what is the next step, right? So what is the journey of that consumer as you acquire them? You're going to advertise to them, then where are you going to take them? Are you going to take them to a landing page that's in language? If it's not in language, do they have the option of selecting in language video assets that educate them about the pharma that you're selling? And then do you have testimonials of other Hispanics on that landing page that have taken the drug or the pharmaceutical, solution that they can then relate to? I mean, there's a lot of things that you can do to make that journey, even though you may not have a lot of Spanish language assets, a lot of things you can do to make that journey more attractive to the consumer and close the information gap or the brand gap between the consumer and the brand.
I agree. Cool. And this is okay, so answer live done. De nada, Javier. We have a couple more questions that I appreciate everyone coming in and jumping in with questions. So
Yeah.
Gerardo Gabriel Atiles Reyes, did you have data on the volume of digital journeys by generation? The 60% boomer in English data point is very interesting, but wondering if that is skewed by a boomer population who is engaging with digital more already versus millennials and Gen X, who are more likely to be digitally trained, nuanced, and attribute to a slightly more narrow Spanish search use. That's a good question.
Yeah, that's a great question. The 60% boomer if it's skewed by the boomer population, well, in this particular, first of all, I don't have data on all of the digital journeys by generation. That said, in this particular study, we were very careful to reflect the populace to mirror the populace in the real world, right? So we had the bilingual, bicultural, the Spanish dom, all of them mirrored the population in the U.S. And the boomers were not the majority of the study. They were probably a third or a little less than a third based on what they represent from populist perspective. So I don't think it was skewed. I don't have the question, but I do believe there was a skew with the fact that we are digitally inclined, right? And that we have much more familiarity with managing the language and the technology when it comes to digital. But that's a really good question. I don't think it was skewed. I think that's what they were, what he's asking, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. And then our final, well, no, there's awesome. Gracias. Very interesting.
Yay. This should be a collective thing. Come on, yes. Hispanics, let's do it. Right?
Yes. One more question. Can you share, this is from Ingrid Vega. Can you share some case studies of where brands executed in culture and in language well? Which ones come to mind?
All right, Stephen, I'll let you take it.
So actually coming out of the Hispanic Marketing Council, that's a conference that's happening next week, they're going to award Molson Coors for their Miller Lite campaign. So that's one that just came to mind because I read about it. So definitely that is one that has done well. You know, some of the tried and true that have a very strong heritage, I think Walmart continues to do a very good job when you think about a retailer that has high resonance with Hispanics and executing in culture and in language. And if I could go back to Molson Coors a minute, sorry, the reason why, Ingrid, to your question is in culture and in language is because they utilize J Balvin, but not only did they utilize him for their Hispanic, they actually used him cross-culturally. So to attract Hispanics across acculturation levels, but to actually lead some of their general market creative. So that's where, you know, a lot of times we tell our clients, think about, and what you were saying about younger generations, they're more multicultural than ever. That's already happened where the tipping point of minority majority, where your insights and your talent and your creative don't necessarily have to, your multicultural talent and creative and insights don't necessarily just resonate with multicultural audiences. That can be more mainstream and drive your mainstream strategy. I think someone else that continues to do well is McDonald's. From a multicultural perspective, they've, you know, long-standing brand. Comcast has done a good amount of stuff where they look at across acculturation levels and try to reach all the Hispanics. And especially what they've done a really good job with is those cultural moments where they lean into Hispanic Heritage Month really well. So those are some that come to mind for me. I don't know if you have anything else.
No, I would agree with you. McDonald's for sure always has been good about understanding and really understanding the bilingual, bicultural early on more than a lot of other brands. Target as well. I think they do some good work.
Okay.
But I could tell you there's some that, and I'll just say this quickly. I had a brand years ago that will remain nameless that had come up with a clothing line. And they were targeting first generation Hispanic women. So we talk about the ethos, right? They're the ones that are most collective, right? And this brand had translated all the copy beautifully. It's clothing line, it makes you feel comfortable. They're targeting the Spanish dominant woman. And they're like, we haven't had any Hispanic sales. What happened? So I said, send me all your stuff. So they sent me all their ads. I compared general market to Hispanic. I'm like, oh my goodness, you missed the mark. The translation is beautiful, but a first generation Spanish dominant Hispanic woman does not dress to be comfortable because she's part of a collective ethos. She dresses for others. She dresses for appearance. That's the key point, not comfort. Comfort is very much an independent, self-reliant American behavior in the sense of, independent, not interdependent. So that's where you can get it wrong. You can have language perfectly translated and culturally miss the boat.
Yeah, I agree. That's very, very well said. Awesome. That ends all the Q&A unless oh wait, hold on, one more question. Do you have an opinion on the
Oh,
strength of a bilingual message, Spanish más o menos, versus an all Spanish language campaign when communicating to an American Hispanic audience? I don't know if you have, so we did a study a couple years ago where we actually, it was called the bilingual brain. And it was very interesting to see when either it was actually really cool because it was neurological. So it wasn't someone filling out a panel. It wasn't panel, like it wasn't diary data or anything of that sort. It was really responses from your brain. So there were a couple of learnings. One learning was that it's very hard. While you could grab the attention, it's very hard for the message to be understood once you switch so drastically. So if it's in an English language network or a Spanish language network, and then you put an English language ad or a Spanish language ad, it was very hard for the brain to like translate it in that instance, right? So that was a peak in terms of attention, but it wasn't necessarily a peak in terms of absorbing the information. And then the second learning was that yes, bilingual advertising did resonate with Hispanics, but not to abuse it. So it was in very culturally relevant and nuanced ways, not necessarily just doing like Spanish más o menos, right? Like, hey, throwing in words so that it sounds like it's bilingual, but not more so because it's culturally relevant and really is in the same tone as how people behave in their everyday lives, right? Because my friends that speak Spanish, I'll be talking to them in English, and then I'll start talking to them, or like how we talk, right? Que hablamos, we'll be talking in English, and then no cambiamos español, right? So as long as it's done with authenticity, it's not abused, and there's reason why and insightful reasoning why, it makes sense.
yeah, I would agree 100%. I don't like the term Spanglish because I think it minimizes it. I was involved many years ago in doing a lot of studies on what worked from the language perspective. And one thing I'll share, which I think is really important, is it has to be minimal words. It has to be purposeful, right? They have to be words that culturally connect you, like what Stephen is saying, to the Hispanic market. It should be primarily, depends who you're targeting. If you're targeting the bilingual, it should be primarily in English with Spanish cultural or linguistic cues. And one of the things we found years ago was that the majority of the bilingual, bicultural Hispanics, while they were bilingual and bicultural, not all of them were biliterate, which was the reason why we recommended back then, you can't use a lot of Spanish words because a lot of them won't even know what you're saying. So
yeah, that's a great point. That biliterate, wow.
Yeah.
Just blew my mind. Awesome. Now we really don't have any open questions. So at this, as sad as it is to see you go, I think we have come to the end of our journey together.
Of our digital journey together,
of our
right?
digital journey together, even more relevant. So,
even more relevant. Thank you guys for joining.
Thank you to you, and thank you to everyone for joining us today. It's been an honor and privilege to create this with you and in collaboration with ThinkNow. So feel free to reach out. I'm on LinkedIn. It's Stephen Pies. If you have any additional questions, and I'm happy to answer it. Hope. So
yes, thank you all for attending, and thanks Stephen, and thanks Mario. ThinkNow. Thank you all.
Thank you guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.